Hello again. I very much enjoyed the previous panel and hope you did too. Next up is a national panel. We have the senior representatives from ATAC, HAC, Helicopter Association of Canada, CBAA, CAC, and AIAC. We'll start, as we did in the regional panel, with short overview presentations from each of them to set the stage, and then we'll move on to a live panel discussion. We asked them all to answer three roughly similar questions to give you an idea of the impact on their members, impact on the workforce, and their predictions for recovery. So, Sam, if we can run the videos now.
Good afternoon. My name is Fred Jones. I'm the president and CEO of the Helicopter Association of Canada. I was looking for some metrics to determine just how tough the times are out there, and a review of this CTA website revealed that there have been about 20 helicopter operators since March of 2020 that have either had their CTA license revoked or suspended or voluntarily surrendered. And combine that with the slow fire season, and you can understand how difficult it's been out there for helicopter operators. I would say in the helicopter segment of the industry, the workforce has been reduced even more significantly. Our industry segment has a high reliance on contracted employees. And I would estimate, based on my discussions with operators, that about half of the workforce has been laid off and with an uncertain return date. We have seen little recovery in our industry segment. As I said, alluded to earlier, the fire season this year was down 90%. From the fire season in 2019. And when you combine that with the effects of the pandemic and the layoffs that occurred as a result of that, and the fact that we have moved into the off-season for helicopter operations, it's going to be quite bleak for the next few months, at least until the spring, when we hope to see a slow but steady recovery and hopefully a busier season next summer.
Hello, bonjour everyone. My name is John McKenna. I'm the president of the Air Transport Association of Canada. ATAC has represented commercial aviation since 1934, and we have approximately 180 members engaged in all aspects of commercial aviation in every region of Canada. Literally all of our members have cut down on operations considerably, canceled routes, stuck to their core competency, their core business. But some of our major members have ceased operations altogether. I don't have specific numbers as to the percentage of labor force that has been laid off or cut, because these are all private companies and we don't necessarily have access to that information. But all companies have had major cutbacks in their work, and those employees that have remained have literally all taken significant cuts in salary. The recovery will be quite slow. IATA predicts 2024, and it is entirely dependent on the ability for the government to approve a vaccine and distribute it, and progressively lift quarantines and travel restrictions. Only then will our industry be able to recover from this pandemic.
So my name is Anthony Norejko. I'm the president and CEO of the Canadian Business Aviation Association. To date, our sector of the industry has been fairly resilient, but at the onset there was some trepidation. But when asked to repatriate Canadians from across the globe, our members stood up to do just that. In addition, we started flying PPE and supplies across the country. And today, our members continue to safely fly and keep Canadian business moving. While our sector has certainly felt the impacts of COVID, I think the important point to make here is that our industry is hurting, and business aviation is but one part of that industry. Without these pieces working together, the industry itself cannot succeed. Ultimately, without a unified approach to the air industry, we'll continue to face significant headwinds into 2021 and beyond. So while our members are seeing new interest in our sector, and this is great news, the challenge to the industry itself remains. And I'm not sure it's about a full recovery, a definition of full recovery. I don't think that'll be the case. I think it'll be a new normal. And without real leadership and a focus on first principles, we are, as we speak today, setting the stage for whatever this new normal looks like. Thank you.
Hi, I'm Mike Mueller, Senior Vice President from the Aerospace Industries Association of Canada. Well, we've seen a significant impact on the companies we represent. Early in the pandemic, we surveyed members and found that around 95% of our members either shut down or had a partial shutdown. So the impacts were very significant. We did a lot of work surrounding essential services designation, and we're pretty pleased that the federal government recognized aerospace as essential, and this definitely helped our companies remain competitive. Well, that would be consistent with what we are seeing also. On the defense side, we're seeing things going better, but on the civil side, the impacts of our workforce has been very significant. Overall, we're seeing a close to 20% reduction in staffing, but again, on the civil side, this would be much worse. Well, it's always dangerous to give an opinion, but from what I'm hearing, the timeline of 2023 makes sense. In order to mitigate the challenges, AIC has been very focused on advocacy. We need a government partner to support us, and that's what AIC has been focused on. Getting the support for our sector from the government, as our other competitor countries have been doing and have done, is going to ensure we don't lose our industry and the good paying jobs that it supports. We need the assistance to get through this so that we can contribute to the economic recovery. And I would say the aerospace industry is well positioned to do that as we export over 80% of what we produce. So that's been a big focus of AIAC.
My name is Daniel Robert Gooch, and I'm president of the Canadian Airports Council. The impact of COVID-19 on Canada's airports has been simply devastating. We've seen $4.5 billion in revenue will be lost by the end of 2021. Airports have had to take on $2.8 billion in debt, and there have been tremendous job losses across the sector, not just at airports by the airports themselves, but also in our airport employment zones, which have just simply been devastated by the impact of this pandemic. In terms of how NASA airports and municipal airports operate on a day-to-day basis, they're very similar. They, of course, are all federally regulated and are subject to the same safety and security standards. In terms of ownership, though, municipal airports are owned and operated by city governments, whereas the National Airport System airports are owned by the federal government in terms of their assets. But they are operated by non-share capital corporations that operate on a not-for-profit basis. They're locally incorporated with boards of directors made up of leaders within the community. And those airports pay rent to the federal government, which serves as a form of a dividend that paid $419 million to the federal government in 2019 and $6.5 billion since 1992. COVID-19 has had a tremendously devastating impact on the airport employment zones at Canada's airports. We've seen airports reduce their staffs by 30 to 50%, and certainly other organizations in the sector have had to make similar moves. We understand that employment across the air sector is anywhere between 30 and 50%, which is just simply devastating, and we don't know when that's going to be able to improve. At Canada's airports, we think it's going to take an extended amount of time for the traffic to recover and for business to recover in our sector. We're looking at maybe 4 to 5 years, and a lot depends on what we do right now or what we don't do right now. We are actively trying to work with federal and provincial governments to get rapid antigen screening into airports so that we can improve safety even more and improve confidence in air travel. But we have a few short months to get that right if we want to save the summer season. Summer 2021 simply cannot look like summer 2022. And we understand that we expect that there will be recovery in other parts of the world starting next summer, and we want Canada to be able to participate in that recovery.
Well, thank you all, gentlemen. I have to say, I found the videos outstanding, articulate and concise. I confess, I was amazed. We gave you all more time, and none of you used the full amount. Wonderful. Nice to actually see faces instead of just a blank screen. So it's nice. We're going to do a quick poll first. It's one of the questions that we're asking you, and we'll get the results, but we'll ask you and see how your results compare to the audience. Sam, can you pull up the poll? I'm not seeing it, but that's fine. Summarizing what I heard from you gentlemen, John, you said all your members have cut back service and routes. Some majors have ceased altogether. Workforce, all of them have had major layoffs and pay cuts. Fred, you talked about the number of your members that have ceased operations voluntarily or otherwise. When we were speaking, you said some couldn't even pay their insurance and had to surrender their license. You estimated 50% of the workforce has been laid off. Anthony, you said your sector is quite resilient, and there is some, I think you called it bittersweet, but you stressed that you're only part of the ecosystem, and without a full recovery for the rest of the ecosystem, your members' upturn is not sustainable. Mike, you noted that 95% have had a partial or full shutdown of your members at the outset. Defense is somewhat better than the civil side. You estimated overall a 20% reduction in workforce, but civil is much worse. Daniel, you noted the devastating impact on your industry and the 4.5 billion of revenue lost. Workforce also decimated by the industry. My first question is to you, Daniel. How many of your members won't survive another 6 months? How many of those airports that we see out there won't survive another 6 months without some form of federal assistance?
Well, our members are typically those with commercial service. They're the larger and go down into regional airports. I don't know that any of our members will necessarily go out of service, go out of business in the next 6 months or so, although there are quite a few smaller airports and smaller communities that are wrestling with that decision. And we've seen some of that where the community has to decide whether or not they want to support their airport. We saw North Bay, the community of North Bay step into financial support their sector, their airport, so that it can continue to provide the jobs that it does for people in the community who don't necessarily rely on air transport. They have a maintenance facility there. There's hundreds of jobs tied up to that airport. But we are concerned more long term with what kind of environment these airports are operating under. $2.8 billion in debt that will have to be repaid. It's going to make the financials really not sustainable.
Heather Bell in the previous panel from BCAC talked about the difficulty that municipal airports are facing in some of the smaller airports, and as if they close and some of the services are cut, the impact that will have on remote communities and otherwise. Before I turn to my next question, does anyone want to comment further on my summary or what you said in your videos?
Robert, I'd add very quickly that, following on what Daniel said, that the question ultimately to ponder is how COVID has impacted the business models of some of the players in the industry. We need airports to fly to. We need air navigation to keep us safe. We need fuel in the aircraft. We need teams to let these things move around the country. And our concern ultimately is that without government support, these costs cannot be borne by those remaining in the flying in the industry. Ultimately, the government's job isn't to pick winners and losers. It's to ensure that the playing field allows for Canadians to succeed. So I think it's important to underscore that point, that government needs to recognize the pain this industry is feeling.
Yeah, Rob, maybe I would just jump in on that also. Our industry is very much dependent on the airlines flying and that whole ecosystem. So it's just great to see the panel you brought together here to have that discussion, because no one part can do it alone. And we definitely need to all be working in concerted action and also with the support of the government. Couldn't agree more.
Thank you. And thank you both for those comments. And Anthony, you make a good point. I mean, there's a lot of fixed costs in this industry, NAVCAN being one of them. They have their costs, and the costs for those who are left will go up. by the carriers that continue to fly. Turning to our next question, are your members concerned about the loss of their skilled workforce? You all alluded to dramatic layoffs, furloughs, voluntary retirement, etc. John, start with you.
Well, clearly we are concerned by that because, we've had to lay off pilots and maintenance and people all across our jobs because of the lack of work. However, these people, they can't wait around until many of these people just can't wait around for our industry to recover, so they will move on to find other jobs in maybe less vulnerable areas. And so we stand to lose a lot of skilled labor, and our chances of bringing those people back are very, very bleak.
Thanks. Mike, you want to comment on that?
Yeah, maybe I would just piggyback off of what John had said. I think the interesting thing or the unique thing about our industry is how global it is. And he's exactly right. Though that work travels from country to country, from place to place, workers go the same. And we're very concerned because one of the things we see about Canada and the aerospace industry in Canada, one of our competitive advantages is the people and the skills that we have here. And I know my big fear is once that skill and talent pool has been decimated due to COVID-19, when businesses are looking where to put the next package, where as we ramp up on the MRO side, and we need the skilled workers to take advantage and bid on those packages and those work programs that are out there, what is that going to look like? So I think we have a bit of an opportunity to ensure that we have the skills, and we really need the government's support. And one of the things that we've been advocating on is, especially on the R&D side, you look at what other countries have been doing, and that's just a phenomenal way to support the industry, but not only support the industry, but support the workers in the industry. And on our side, 25% higher wages than the average manufacturing. So there's a lot of very positive things to be looking at.
A number of you have mentioned that the wage subsidy, CEWS, has been a lifeline. But Mike, you commented that it needs to be more stable and more predictable going forward if it's going to help industry. Is that a general consensus?
Yeah, from our perspective, one of the issues we've seen with the wage subsidy program, and very much a lifeline for the companies, and so thanks to the government for putting that in place as a bit of a stopgap measure. But one of the things that we're looking for out of that program is the timeliness of information and the consistency of information, and just understanding what's happening next on that. And the economic update was good to see, but it's actually the details and the regulations. And we encountered some issues on that during the spring. So I'd encourage, if there's government folks listening on the line, more proactive communication as companies are going and making those business decisions. Absolutely.
Daniel, your comments on members concerned about the skilled workforce?
Yeah, well, maybe I just want to add to what Mike was saying.
Please, yeah.
The wage subsidy was very helpful to airports. It did provide some funds, but when your business is down, when you're only operating at 5, 10, 15% of your business, that support is limited. I'll give you one example. We have a small commercial airport that was losing about $250,000 a month. The wage subsidy provided them with about $50,000 a month. So they're still losing $200,000 a month. So it's important that, particularly for the hardest hit sectors, the wage subsidy be understood in context. Certainly, we do have concerns with loss of skilled workers. I mean, airports have had to lay off their staff. A lot of airports are basically training their workers. I mean, it's not quite like being a pilot. It's a lot of internal training and cross training. Someone who is a professional in a fire hall might be also out on the airfield in the summer, maintaining the property there. These people have found, are trying to find other jobs or found other jobs, and we do hope that they will come back. I'd say we also worry, though, about the loss of skilled workers in other parts of the sector and what that does to our capacity to meet the pent-up demand we expect will be there on the other end of this. If Air Canada doesn't have the pilots or the aircraft, then the air services won't come to the community. And we know the airlines are not as big as they were because of this crisis. They've reduced their fleets. Same with NAV Canada. Several years ago, there were real serious capacity constraints at some of our busiest airports related to air traffic control. And that's a highly skilled workforce that NAV Canada's built up over the years. And to see layoffs there is definitely a concern.
Fred and Anthony, I'm coming back to what government can do and the wage subsidy, but anything you want to add on loss of skilled workforce? You're muted, Fred.
Sorry, I just wanted to add to some of the other comments. The CEWS is only of some assistance where you can still justify keeping the employee on. When the amount of work goes down to a certain point, or the wage subsidy drops to a certain point, you can't even afford to keep them on under any circumstances, because you're losing money at an even higher rate. So a good example in the helicopter industry, based on our discussions or my discussions with operators, is if you use a 50% reduction as the sort of a benchmark for what's going on out in our industry, is they've either cut everyone's salary by 50%, or they've laid off 50% of their staff. Those are two models that could be used. And there's going to become a point where even the wage supplement won't even be able to allow you to keep the people that are still working on. So it's just going to, as the wage supplement diminishes, and it's difficult to know what the formula is that's going to be applied going forward, goes to some of the communication points. There's a very real chance, as the queues or the wage supplement declines, the layoffs will become even larger going forward. A point that Daniel raised that I think is really important is, we go through these periods, whether it's an economic recession or a pandemic is probably the worst example we've seen in the history of Canadian aviation. But we go through these periods where, running up to it, there's a massive shortage of human resources, human talent to run our businesses. And then we go through this problem and we get a stay of execution from a workforce perspective. And in this case, it's even worse, because the circumstances we're experiencing now will drive people out of the industry, and our problems will be exponentially increased when the industry does start to rebound, because they aren't coming back.
Thanks, Fred. John, I'm going to move on, but I'm coming back to you on the next one. U.S. study, as we heard earlier, said that by the end of 2025, we'll have lost 35% of our pre-COVID workforce, 10% voluntary retirements or separation, 25% of those furloughed or laid off will move to other industries. Are your members concerned about not being able to hire the workers they need as the recovery takes hold? John, Mike, I'll start with you on that one.
Sure. I mean, those numbers are pretty consistent with what we've been seeing. We went out to our members just in the last month or so, trying to get a sense of where folks were at on the employment side. And it looks like, as of right now, December, so 10 months into the pandemic, we're approaching 20% layoffs across the board. As I'd mentioned in the opening remarks, on the defense side, we're doing a little bit better than that. But then on the civil side, some of the companies are approaching 50% layoff, which is pretty dramatic. Absolutely. Yes, we would be very concerned about the labor shortage as we try and ramp back up. I think that goes back to the original discussion from just before. How do we make sure that we use this time to make sure, one, we don't lose the skills that we have, and then we also, I think what Fred had said was absolutely bang on. How do we make sure that those negative impressions of what's happening right now on the aerospace side doesn't cement with those looking to come into the industry? Because when this rebounds, there will be jobs, and they're very good paying jobs. So how do we do that? Some significant challenges ahead.
John, your industry is losing hundreds of pilots, maintenance workers. Are your members concerned about being able to rehire when it picks up?
I'd say thousands and not hundreds. Yes. And I want to echo on what Mike said. The losing our skilled labor is is a huge concern, but also the long-term effects of this pandemic on our ability to recruit people is another one that we can't neglect. People will think twice before coming to our industry. This is the second time in a bit over 10 years that our industry is damaged by either a financial crisis, or like in 2000, like we had in 2008. We had a pilot shortage in 2008 that was wiped out by this financial crisis. We lost a whole cohort of people who said, I'm not going there. And now the same thing is going to happen. I teach on weekends at university level courses to people in our industry, and many of them are reconsidering their careers. And a year ago, a pilot could pick his job anywhere in the world, just about. Now, well, I look at companies that have gone from having 800 pilots on their staff to 90. So we're going to lose a lot of people, and we'll lose them for good, and we'll have a hard time attracting new people to our industry.
Thanks. I'm going to move to the next question, which is how can government support retaining our skilled workforce? And drawing on that Sue's question, you told me it's wage subsidy is great to keep a skeleton staff, but as others said, doesn't help if you're shut down, and you talked about carriers being highly leveraged and the need for other types of funding other than wages. Do you want to elaborate on that?
Of course, our industry is highly, there's a high debt level. We're highly leveraged, and it's good. Yes, wage subsidy helps people when you're keeping skeleton staff. When those 90 people or 90% of your people you've laid off, it doesn't help. But what our industry is that has with this high debt level, it can't meet its short-term obligations. There's the revenue's not there to pay the part of the debt that you're supposed to pay this year or this month or next month. We have, as in airports, we have, a lot of high fixed costs, and we're just not meeting those. So the government, we need liquidity, and the government, we don't need more debt. We need liquidity to be able to help us through the first of the two challenges that facing our industry. That the first one being, let's get around the corner. The second one being, what is around the corner? So
I hear you.
I'll talk about that later.
Mike, you said the government needs to do a better job of promoting the industry as a viable career. Do you want to elaborate on that?
Yeah, I go back, we started to see some issues a couple of years ago, just in our competitiveness internationally, and we did a Vision 2025 initiative. There was one of our encounters. We were at a school out in British Columbia, and we were talking to folks going into the industry and just getting their sort of perceptions. And again, this is pre-COVID, but I remember it clearly. One of the students stood up and said, "Well, I'm concerned about it because some of the layoffs that have happened, and it wasn't layoffs specific to British Columbia, it wasn't layoffs specific to Western Canada." So that notion of the perception of the industry, when everyone looks at the industry and sees how in rough shape it is, and I think the government has a role to play to instill confidence in the industry, to identify the industry as strategic and a priority. And part of that is by having a national plan for the industry. We don't see that. We see all of our competitor nations have national plans on how to support, how to grow and foster the industry, and we're lacking that. So I think, just very high level, that's a great place to start, to instill the confidence in folks to choose an industry and a sector that has very high-skilled, good-paying jobs. Other side would be research and development, and it's just not about the intellectual property and things like that. It's the jobs that it creates and the skill that it retains, especially during this time.
And if you and I talked about when you had your week on the Hill a week or so ago, every government official came and said it's a strategic industry and it's valuable and high-paid jobs, and we recognize that. But they're not saying it publicly, and you're saying they need to be doing that to instill confidence in people that it is a viable industry. I think that's right.
Yeah, and we definitely appreciate those words of support. But let's see the funding programs. Let's see the policies. Let's see the strategy in place that all of our competitor countries have done. They're supporting the airlines to keep them going, so that we can build the planes for the airlines, and it's just that trickle effect.
Anthony, you talked about one crucial element that's missing from the government. You want to tell us about that?
Well, I'd go back to something to incorporate even some of the questions that have been posed. The first thing I'd frame is the idea that, recovery is a loose word. I would use scratch and claw our way back to this new normal. When I did this York program, this mini MBA, there was a finance prof that gave this great explanation of finance professionals need to be able to get good at understanding two hands. On the left hand is one option. You assign some probability to its outcome. And on the right could be something equal and opposite. And I think what people need to understand is that's the kind of mindset that we need to have in aviation. We need to bring that out to government, that mindset in aviation that we have, that every decision that we undertake has consequences and risk ebbs and flows. So when you tie that all back to support and understanding the industry and what it needs, when you look at questions like there was a question there about flight operations down 80 to 85% in Canada, fundamentally it comes down to provinces setting up interprovincial border restrictions. Those limitations today, if they aren't recognized, this recovery that we talk about will go further and further down the road. With respect to skilled workforces, there's the ideas of IQ, EQ, and LQ. We have trade skills, we have soft skills. And from the poll question, overwhelming, the audience believes that we need to move away from brick and mortar. And that soft skill element, the stuff that's conducted online, that kind of work needs to make its way into the training system for the workforce of the future. In other words, we need to feel comfortable about what it is to train online. We need to move away from metrics like one must do 100 hours of this, then you meet competence. It's a nuanced approach. And too often we want to live in this binary world. I think what COVID has certainly taught me is that on balance, we live in a binary world. People want a 1 or a 0, a this or a that. And I think when you get down to it, what we need to get comfortable with is that there needs to be a risk management, probabilities assigned to decisions, and that ebb and flow needs to change. We can't just keep doing what we've been doing because this recovery is not going to take place. We are scratching and clawing our way back right now. That's the kind of work we need to do.
One of the things you mentioned when we were speaking is you said testing.
Absolutely. I mean, we can't get Canadians moving, whether that's through the schools, whether that's through the seniors' homes, whether that's in the back of aircraft, without providing that level of assurance. It's possible. It's out there today. We just need that kind of push because as positive as the news is on vaccine, Health Canada's approval, its distribution, questions all remain. And what we need to do and get good at is providing the testing. We can get better and the accuracy of the analysis, all the different questions that come up about rapid testing. The benefit is this: you can give a peace of mind to Canadians as they move about and through their day that we're doing the best that we possibly can on staying healthy. And that's the way to encourage Canadians to move again safely.
I think it's extraordinary that we're this far into the pandemic and we still don't have testing sorted. There's airports around the world and airlines around the world, I won't mention them, who are doing pre-departure testing. And they seem to have a system in place. It's extraordinary to me that we can't do that, although some of our airports are implementing that, and that's a good sign. You mentioned the poll, and you can all see the results there. I want to ask you, the panel, the same question. Colleges, universities only producing 25% of our workforce already. The survey we did, capacity is down, or enrollment is down 44% for this year and next year. Grads down to maybe 900 instead of the usual 1,500. Colleges are not going to, or governments aren't going to invest in increasing capacity. All of those colleges had wait lists pre-COVID, and government wasn't expanding the capacity, wasn't funding the brick and mortar institutions. So do we need to look at new ways of training? What do we need to do? And 82% of the audience says yes. I'll start with Fred. What do we need to do?
Well, I would say I think the change is inevitable in terms of a departure from a bricks and mortar model. Even if we return to normal, and we eradicate the COVID-19, it's going to change everybody's way of thinking. It's going to expand online learning and webcasts and new methods for educating, for sure. So I don't think there's any doubt about that. At least in the flight training segment of the industry, obviously, there's still some hands-on skills that are required. So we'll probably see less of a departure from a model in a traditional flight training setting. For colleges that also provide flight training, they're going to be obliged to do it face-to-face to some extent as well. So yes and no, I guess, would be the short answer.
And our survey was restricted to the 3 licensed trades because those are the colleges we work with most. And much of the restrictions at the moment, bluntly, are embedded within the regulations from Transport Canada, mandating classroom only, no blended learning, and a dictated curricula. They have moved as a result of COVID and allowed classrooms, happily, because the classrooms were unavailable, to move to new ways of learning. And I think the colleges are doing a great job of it. But I guess we need to ensure that that continues, not just for those trades, but for other trades. Mike, anything you want to add for manufacturing? I mean, some of your students go to the colleges, but you've got a lot of aerospace engineers and others. Do they need to move to new ways of training?
Well, I think new ways of training where it makes sense, but I would sort of go back to, the perception issue, number one, I think needs to be addressed, and there's a role for government to play in that. But the other part that I would mention is that, how do you make the training more responsive to the needs of industry? And I think we're going to have to be really nimble coming out of the pandemic on where do we need the skilled workers, and how does the universities, colleges at the provincial level, how do we make sure that it is, funneling folks into those jobs that are available coming out? So I think, more nimbleness, maybe not so much virtual bricks and mortars, but more nimbleness in response to industry's needs to keep going.
John, do you want to add anything?
Well, I have to watch my words here, but what I'm saying is that the government has to quit working in silos all the time. We're seeing how inefficient they are because it's taking months to get anything done. And the progress we're seeing, for example, rapid testing in airports, that's not a government initiative. It's a provincial initiative and private sector initiative. And the federal government is just latching on to it. We've been pushing them to react on a number of ways, and well, they're not used to working together. So it complicates our lives immensely. So I think there's a lot that needs to be done there before we can actually count on these guys as being partners in the new world that we're going to be facing post-COVID.
Gotcha. Anthony, anything else you want to add on training? You started that discussion and the need to be more nimble and to use technology to help us be more focused in our training, to give broader access to training, remove the requirement to go on campus 5 days a week. Anything you want?
Yeah, I would add that, COVID is certainly teaching us quite a bit about capabilities and the needs for change. And, I think when I look at, say, if I log into LinkedIn and I look at folks in our industry and you see the prevalence of that open to work hashtag, the further our Canadians, those that are in our industry, get away from their work, the harder we've got to work to keep them embedded, to keep them engaged. And I think that push to online, creating where appropriate the skills that they need, that they can train, they can stay current, that they can stay connected is required. So pushing the government in this area is critical. So the folks that are participating and attending today are part of that solution. We've got to get to a place where we blend the latest technologies so that we do the best job possible at keeping Canadians available and ready to work when the time returns.
Daniel, you have a very diverse workforce, not necessarily the same trades as everyone else here, and I realize that a vast majority of the people working at GTAA are not GTAA employees. Anything you want to add to this discussion, given the context of your workforce?
Yeah, absolutely. So, I mean, there are some traditional educational programs, Georgian College and others, for those who want to go into airports. But, as I said earlier, a lot of the work, a lot of the training, a lot of the professional development is inside the industry, and a lot of the training that can take place online, at least for us, already is. We work with our colleagues in the United States at ACINA and our colleagues down the road in Montreal at ACI World on a lot of online programs for training, TP312, for example. Internationally, we have programs like ACI World's AMPAP program for professional accreditation. We're launching a program in the US called the US Airport Professionals Program, which we will be bringing to Canada as well. So I guess that's a silver lining, is that a lot of what could be done online, at least for us, has already migrated online. And
I guess the point is that it's working for you guys online. We need to expand that and start using other methods of teaching. I have some questions from the audience, but I just want to, one final one quickly. We've heard about the pandemic creating fewer opportunities, discouraging people from coming to our industry, youth, etc. Does anyone disagree with that? I mean, how others have talked about it cyclical anyways, the barriers to students coming into our industry. Does anyone want to comment on the fact that COVID will just accelerate the migration to other careers? Does everyone agree? Does anyone disagree with that?
I'd add that I still would kind of tend to take a point of disagreement. I think with respect to the air industry, people are still engaged. I think that what's unique is COVID has paused potentially some of the ability to hire the new talent. But what we're going to see is that some that were engaged in the industry that have enjoyed a long career will recognize, of course, that this situation may push them, whether it's by choice of the employer to offer certain packages that require them to make a choice to leave. I think what it's going to do is when the industry scratches and claws its way back to what we will call this new normal, opportunities will be there. And those individuals that realize that their job is more than just that technical output, that they can play a role, that their soft skills are developed. There's more to this industry and this career than just that front line. And I think that will always be an opportunity for people. So I don't know that COVID is going to turn people off. I think once they see that there's an opportunity, once we get past this challenge, I mean, there are still rule reg changes that require, whether it's flight and duty times, fatigue, etc. Those situations will resolve themselves in time. And I think what we'll be left with is an industry that still needs really great people. And if you're somebody that's engaged in those efforts, there's going to be a great role for you in the industry.
I think all of us would agree with that. I guess the question is, how do we communicate that? And Mike alluded earlier to the need for government to promote the industry, and I guess we need to as well. Any final comments any of you want to make that we haven't already addressed?
On this subject, you mean?
No, on any subject generally, labor force, training, the ability of workers to come back, your members' concerns about that, anything that we haven't touched on? Otherwise,
I'm always impressed by Anthony's positive attitude towards everything, and I gotta tell you, I just hope that there are carriers around to hire these people. There are regional airports there to offer jobs. I mean, the people's enthusiasm may come back, but to what? We are facing a challenge that we need short-term survival in our industry, but the longer-term challenge that we're facing is what kind of industry, what kind of demand are we facing post-COVID? How are habits going to change? What are the costs going to be? The costs are going to go up. Obviously, we're going to have to pay for all this eventually, and there are going to be increased costs. What's going to be impact on business travel? People are getting used to this kind of format. They're going to say, well, I'm not going to go across the country for a 24-hour meeting. So there'll be a lot of adaptation and a lot of long-term impact on our industry that we have to deal with. So yeah, we have to address many issues other than just short-term survival.
And maybe I would just piggyback off of what John had said. There's no reason a country of 35 million people should have the 5th largest aerospace sector, and the reason we do have that is because of governments taking care of it, nurturing it, investing in it, and we need that investment now more than ever, especially during the COVID-19 pandemic. We see other countries, pouring support into the sector because they recognize the good jobs and the prosperity that it brings. And, as an industry, 80% of what we produce is exported. So what better industry to help bring us out of that slump and through the recovery?
Yeah, well, Mike works for our rich cousin. He works for the rich cousin because the government's not investing in services, man. Maybe investing in you manufacturers, but he's not investing in airports, not investing in air carriers. He's absent from our scene. So, yeah, you're the rich cousin.
Well,
I might add that what we haven't talked about is the knock-on effect that the devastation in our sector is going to have for other sectors. There was a global news report out today about a woman in Atlantic Canada who travels for work, and she says it's unrealistic to live in Atlantic Canada right now if you have to travel for work.
Yeah.
What's going to happen to the hotels, the Fogo Island Inn off the coast of Newfoundland if Gander has no air service? The hotels, the restaurants, we do expect there will be a lot of pent-up demand for travel. And we are going to be competing with other countries. And as people are returning to France and returning to Germany, are they going to be able to return to Canada? Are we going to have the air routes? Are we going to have the capacity? Are we going to have an air traffic control system that's affordable? There are a lot of questions, and they go far beyond our sector and employment into other sectors.
Absolutely right. Fred, 1 minute. Last word to you. Anything you want to add?
Well, I share a little bit of Anthony's outlook. The glass is always half full, but not without help. And we are in desperate circumstances here, and we need the federal government's assistance to get through this, and more of it, and soon, for all segments of the industry.
And what I retain from all of these comments is that if we don't get it, the air traffic system and the service industry will not look the same a year from now, and who knows how long it would take to recover and how many jobs will be lost. Gentlemen, I thank you all for taking the time to be here this afternoon. As always, great insight and a real pleasure having you all here. My sincere thanks to all of you.